This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Kansas wheat growers Derek Sawyer and Jay Armstrong begin today's show as they discuss how their wheat crop fared this past year and what they learned for next season. Justin Waggoner, K-State Extension beef cattle specialist, continues the show as he recaps the recent Focus on Feedlots report and says what cattle producers can be doing to prepare for weaning. Wrapping up the show is K-State Extension horticulture expert Matt McKernan explaining the damage grubs can cause in home lawns and how a rescue treatment in late July or August may be necessary if the damage is extensive. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Thursday show talking with a couple of Kansas wheat farmers to hear about how their wheat harvest went this past season and what they've learned to maybe apply into the next season. And first, we're joined by McPherson County wheat farmer Derek Sawyer. Derek, thanks for joining us today.
How are you today? It's a pleasure to be on.
Derek, as we look at this past year's wheat crop, how are things looking for you?
I would say just like across the whole state, the variability of the wheat crop was quite evident throughout our farm also. We had some wheat that I would have called good for the year. And then just like everybody else, we had some fields that were not very good.
Did you have any issues with diseases or pests or anything like that this year?
You know, ironically, that's one of the things that we didn't have to fight was rust or pests or we didn't have to spray fungicide, but all of the other options that could have gone wrong for this wheat crop, from too wet, too dry, wind, hail, just a little bit of everything on this year's wheat crop.
Were you unfortunately a part of that group of farmers who weren't able to get all their wheat out of the field before we had all those rain showers?
No, we got started about on the first week of June, and we were lucky to get finished up before it really set in and rained. I say that, and we did not have one full day of cutting from a normal day from early from late morning until late night. The weather just did not cooperate, so we could harvest a full day of cutting, but we got with it whenever we could and finished up before it really set in.
Were there any things that you learned from this year that you will plan to take forward as you think about your future wheat crops?
I go back to it's imperative to get a good stand up front. We had some wheat that we got in before it rained about the last time at the end of the year last fall. And it rained too hard on it. We replanted in spots, but those fields stuck out as far as we did not get a good stand. And when you don't get a good stand in a wheat crop, it's hard to make it up. And so getting a good stand, keeping along with it as it's growing in the spring, and getting it fertilized and everything that wheat needs. Wheat's pretty hardy, but if you can keep up with it and keep it growing, then it can do well for you throughout drought stress.
Derek, as you're in farming and everything keeps evolving, how do you keep learning about new techniques or new things to try on your operation?
I'm blessed right now to be a part of the Kansas Wheat Commission, and so we spend the tax dollars, quote tax dollars, the checkoff dollars that every farmer across the state contributes to the Kansas Wheat Commission. We're tasked with spending that money, and a lot of it goes towards research. And so it's been eye-opening to see the research that is being done for wheat. My grandpa would have said wheat's just cut and dry. You put it in the ground and you harvest it, and it's always there. Behind the scenes, we're figuring out a lot of different things that can hopefully bring value to wheat and hopefully bring value to the Kansas farmer's pocketbook down the road.
Derek, as a farmer in McPherson County, how are your other crops and your other avenues of your farming operation looking in the beginning of July?
At this point of the year, it's actually encouraging. to see what we've got growing. I know a month ago it was a completely different story with corn. Even now, I don't know that I've got some corn that is not going to be did not meet knee high by 4th of July, and then I've got some that's tasseled and it's across the road from each other, and it had to do with different farming techniques and just spottiness of rain, and it was an ugly spring. But as of right now, I'm encouraged to drive around and look and just hope for a late freeze this fall, I guess, is what we're going to have to hope for.
Derek, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Very good. I appreciate the opportunity.
Once again, that was McPherson County wheat farmer Derek Sawyer. Our next wheat grower we're going to talk about in Kansas is from Atchison County, Jay Armstrong. Jay, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, it's nice to be with you.
Jay, how did your wheat crop this year look?
Well, it looked good, but it wasn't as good as it looked compared to last year. So we grow soft wheat up here. And probably not considered wheat country because we can grow soybeans and corn. But I've been using a double crop program here for the last 4 or 5 years, and so which has worked for me. And so hopefully my double crop beans that we got in early will make up. But it wasn't as good as I'd hoped.
A lot of times when I think of wheat in Kansas, I think of hard red winter wheat. And so what do you see as some differences between that and the wheat you're growing?
Well, I will shoot for 100 bushel. We'll seed and fertilizer for 100 bushel of wheat. Last year, for instance, the wheat averaged 117 bushel. And this year, it was down to 71. So that's just how much it went. And it was the freeze that it took my tillers away. And so we just didn't have as many heads as we normally do. But it's that intensive wheat planting. And then, because I have crop dryers that I use for my corn, I will take off the wheat, between 15 and 20%, dry it, which will give me another week or 10 days earlier for bean planting. And that's usually worth about another 10 bushels. So, we're taking our marginal ground and making it again into what my better ground that grows corn and soybeans do.
Were there things that you learned from this past season to apply to future seasons?
Oh, Mother Nature makes you look good or bad. And the freeze was just one of those things that you couldn't control. I think that what I'm playing with now is how early and how wet I can cut wheat, so that I can keep produce higher wheat bean yields. And I think I could have started a little earlier this year than I did. It was an early year anyway, but we were still cutting dry wheat by the time we finished.
So how early did you start?
It was on the 19th of June, and I probably could have started on the 14th or 15th. We were fighting some rains, though. We had a lot of rain up here, and so it was. You just couldn't cut every day.
So, Jay, while you've mentioned a few other crops, how overall for your operation are things looking when it does come to those crops?
Well, I think we've been fortunate that we've had plenty of moisture right now. Most of the corn is pollinating, and we've got while we've got heat, we've got humidity, so that'll allow the corn to be pollinated. I just received a little over an inch of rain this past weekend, and so while I'm hearing reports up in the Dakotas and Minnesota that it's getting really dry. We can take some hot, dry weather here. So it's looking pretty good. I did have too much rain, even a flood in my bottom grounds earlier this spring, which didn't help. But right now, it looks pretty good.
For when you're wanting to learn about new management strategies or just learn more about farming, what are your favorite resources for doing that?
Well, I'll go to when it comes to seed, you talk to the seed industry, And so that's the first place I go. And then I will follow it up by researching. You just kind of get on Google and YouTube, and you start looking to see if that what you're being told, is what other people have had experience with. So you kind of double check what you hear. A lot of what I do is just trying to find to be a low cost producer is to find prices that will help me do that.
Jay, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Okay, thanks. Nice talking with you.
That was Atchison County wheat grower Jay Armstrong, and at the beginning of the segment, we heard from McPherson County wheat grower Derek Sawyer as they shared how their wheat crop did this past year and what they're looking forward to in the next season. If you are wanting to stay up to date on wheat in Kansas, there are a few different ways you can do that. If you're looking to find information, you can check out K-State's agronomy department, which is agronomy.k-state.edu. You can also sign up for their weekly agronomy e-update emails, where you'll learn more about all the crops in Kansas, of course, including wheat. You can find those by going to agronomy.k-state.edu/e-updates. Once again, that's agronomy.k-state.edu/e-updates. You, of course, also can head over to Kansas Wheat's website, which is kswheat.com, or you can check out their social media, which you will find linked on their website. I will link all these resources in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show discussing a recent focus on feedlots, but then also some things cattle producers should be keeping in mind this time of year with K-State Extension beef cattle specialist Justin Waggoner. Justin, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks, Shelby.
Justin, beginning discussing our focus on feedlots, and can you remind us, what is that?
Yeah, so the K-State Focus on Feedlots is essentially a summary of feedlot performance and closeout data. It's a survey that we conduct with 5 feed yards across the state, mostly in western Kansas, each month. And so we record a variety of performance information as well as some commodity prices.
And looking at the May 2026 closeout data, any notable numbers within it?
Yeah, so a couple things to point out. So our focus on feedlots is always a bit behind. So even though we're in July, we're talking about May closeout numbers that were collected at the end of June. So just to orient ourselves, so we're back in May 2026. So as we have our conversation, kind of think about closeout conditions during the late spring here of 2026. So, in terms of things that I think jump out in terms of this month's focus on feedlots, certainly some lower feedlot marketings. So oftentimes April and May tends to be a little lower in terms of feedlot marketings, just on average across the industry relative to other months. Something else that's really interesting in this month's data is just we are now at an average days on feed at 200 days, 190 on the heifers and 200 days on the steers. And so that's really been a common topic of conversation through most of 2025 and 2026 is, what does the new days on feed number look like? What is the new average days on feed going to look like in the feedlot industry moving forward? And it really looks like that we're settling somewhere between 170 to 200 days on feed for both steers and heifers. And so that's quite a bit different than where we have been at other times, at other time periods where, we would have said, a decade ago, it was 150 days on feed. So we're certainly seeing some increases there. We can just jump into the numbers if you want.
Go for the numbers, Justin.
All right. Thanks, Shelby. So in terms of feedlot marketing for both steers and heifers this month, we were 14,167 steers and 13,000 heifers. So this is a little lower than where we've been some other months within the focus on feedlots. In weights, really for both steers and heifers, were steady. We still look at the feedlot, placing 8-weight cattle, so 799 on the steers and 754 on the heifers. Exit weights, 1523 on the steers and 1378 on the heifers. Average days on feed, which we talked a little bit about earlier, was 200 days on the average for the steers with a range of 179 to 232. Heifers, 190 days on feed average with a range of 165 to 210. In terms of average daily gain, really strong performance numbers this year, or this month of May, or this spring in the feedlot. So 3.56 for the steers and 3.19 for the heifers. In terms of feed conversion, feed to gain, this is on a dry basis. So 6.36 for the steers and 6.8 for the heifers. Death loss, industry average is right there around 1.5% currently. So steers were 1.51% and the heifers were 1.88. In terms of cost of gain, we were about $1 lower in terms of both the steers and the heifers relative to the April closeout. So we came in at 101.67 for the steers and 110.14 for the heifers. In terms of projected cost of gain, so this would be cattle that would be placed on feed in the month of June. This is survey data once again. So 105.33 for the steers in terms of that place cost of gain. That's about $2 lower than what we were in the prior month. Heifers 109.67, and that's about $4 lower than where we were in terms of the April report. In terms of our commodities, corn was 456, so that is slightly lower. The range there was 427 to 485 a bushel. Well, we did see some interesting movements in the alfalfa hay price. That was up slightly, 163.63 per ton this month. We did see in the range, the upward side of that moved up to $245 a ton. That may be indicative of drier conditions earlier on, especially in the western part of the state, and maybe some just reflective of overall hay supply that might be available to our feeders.
And Justin, while we're thinking about things for this time of year for our spring calving cattle herds and looking out on the pastures, with our recent rainfall that we saw a few weeks ago, will that have an impact on how much forage is available for cattle, in your opinion?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think there's been quite a bit of beneficial rainfall across a large swath of the state, especially here in Southwest Kansas where I'm located. And so, we've seen some of those pasture conditions certainly improve following those rains. But one of the things we have to remember is that forage biomass, the amount of forage that we see in those pastures, really is reflective of rainfall from April, May, and June. So some of this rain, although we've really seen some of those pasture conditions improve, green up, we may not see the total amount of growth on those pastures that we would in terms of a normal year, or a year where we received some earlier precipitation events early on in the growing season.
So a couple of months ago, we discussed early weaning. And so thinking about just weaning in general now, what are some things spring calving cattle producers should be checking out for their facilities?
Yeah, so I think that's the summertime is a good time to start to think about some of those little tasks that we need to get done, and weaning is really the next thing that's right around the corner in terms for a spring calving cow-calf producer here in the state of Kansas. And so whether it's early weaning or just the normal weaning program, I start to think about some of those things that how do we prepare ourselves, right? As we think about the weaning pen, right? Where are we going to wean those calves? If that's a dry lot or a dust, an environment where there's going to be a lot of dust, simply getting into that, getting those facilities ready for those calves, now is really the time to do that. So getting that pen cleaned, if we're going to wean in a dry lot scenario, if we've got some feed bunks and water troughs, do we have holes at the feed bunk? Because that often happens, right? Can we get those filled in? Can we make sure that those calves around the water tanks, et cetera, can we get those filled in? Can we really start to set ourselves up to where when we do get to the fall and it's time to wean those calves, that we've got that pen environment really ready to go. Another part of that, I think, is beginning to think about our marketing plan for those calves. If it's an early weaning situation, what is the ideal time? If we're going to look at some video auction options that might be out there, I mean, most of that, those are decisions that we can start to have some conversations with field reps for auctions and those things right now. Now is the time to be kind of making those decisions and starting to have those conversations. So in terms of those weaning programs coming up the fall, those are a few things that come to my mind that producers may want to consider doing.
As those calves have gotten weaned, how often do you recommend the cattle producers go check them?
So, in terms of, we know weaning is going to be a stressful event for most calves. And so depending on that weaning environment, Some may choose to wean in a more extensive environment if we're doing some sort of a fence line protocol where those calves are going to be on grass with some degree of supplementation. In most cases, it's generally going to be a good idea to check on those calves on a daily basis. We know from whether we're supplementing with a feed or in a dry lot situation, just getting through those calves on a daily basis, assessing health, general condition. So really, in terms of just the best management practice, it's really a good idea to those newly weaned calves to take that extra time and probably check on them on a daily basis.
Are there things that can be done to hopefully make that a less stressful time for those calves?
Absolutely. If we think about one of the biggest transitions that a weaned calf has to make is they've been accustomed to a diet that essentially is mother's milk and some sort of grazed forage, maybe a little bit of creep feed in some scenarios. And so for the most part, most of those calves, the biggest transition that they're going to have to make is a different environment, as well as maybe some different or new and novel feed stuff. So that may be some sort of a weaning ration that's delivered in a feed bunk. And so getting those calves to where they're acclimated to those facilities, maybe they've had some access to the weaning pen or the weaning environment, can be a good way to reduce that stress. Maybe give them some exposure to that weaning diet while they're with their dam, right? That can be another good way to adapt them to that. But then just having a protocol and having a plan in place for as those calves kind of come into the facility, what does that feeding plan look like? What are those calves going to be most accustomed to eating? Typically, most calves will consume a high quality grass hay. In addition to maybe if we're using a weaning ration or some sort of a weaning pellet, how do we adapt those calves to that by offering that to that? And one of the ways we can do that is by utilizing that hay to kind of draw those calves to the bunk, maybe at a lower percentage of body weight. So say 0.5% of that calf's current body weight on a dry matter basis, we would offer that in terms of hay along with that weaning diet. So the total diet delivered would be about 1% of that calf's body weight. So initially we would place the hay on top of that weaning ration for a few days. Gradually we're increasing the amount of the weaning ration that we're offering that calf. And then over time we begin to swap the order of those ingredients in the bunk to where we'll put that hay on the bottom and then the weaning ration on top, with the thought being that those calves would then eat through that hay to get to that weaning ration on the bottom in there. And so basically having a good plan in place in terms of how we manage that and adapt those calves in the bunk can be a great way to get those calves to more accustomed to some of those novel feed stuffs.
Justin, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Shelby.
That was K-State Extension Beef Cattle Specialist Justin Waggoner. As always, you can find more information from K-State Extension's beef team by going on over to their website, ksubeef.org. I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead.
Welcome back, and thanks for joining us on Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. Grubs are one of the state's most common and destructive lawn pests and can potentially affect both tall fescue and bluegrass lawns. A few grubs might not be a problem, but when we get large numbers, typically 6 to 10 in a square foot area, we need to start thinking about treatment. K-State Extension horticulture expert Matt McKernan says that doing nothing is going to lead to a lot of damage and possible loss of some areas of the lawn. If you miss the preventative window, he says that you can still apply a rescue treatment in late July or early August. Matt, grub control is something that everyone thinks about, and sometimes you don't even maybe necessarily know that you have grubs.
Exactly. There's many types of beetle insects in Kansas that can cause damage as a grub, especially to our lawns during the late summer months. Typically, the southern masked chafer, the Japanese beetle, and the May-June bugs are the most common grub species that we find. All of them look very similar as a grub, and they do very similar damage to our landscapes, and especially our turf grass. And that damage can sometimes be hard to identify because it looks a lot like some of the diseases and environmental stresses that our lawns go through during the summer months. But primarily when we're looking for grub damage, what we want to look for are small areas of yellowing or discoloration. Often they're going to be irregular and kind of spotty in the lawn. So that's our visual cue from a distance. Then when we get up close, we really want to kind of pull up on those dead areas on the grass itself. And oftentimes when we have extensive grub damage, the grubs will have eaten the roots right off of the lawn itself. And so that turf grass peels right up or pulls right up because there's no roots left to anchor it into the ground.
When you've discovered that, there is an opportunity to do some treatment then?
Yes, there's several ways that we can go about treating for grubs. The first is to do preventative treatments, especially in lawns that we know have a history of grubs in the past or we anticipate large grub populations this year in. So with our preventative treatments, typically what we're trying to do is look at the late June to early July timeframe to put down products that are going to be preventative. Typically that's going to be a product that contains the active ingredient imidacloprid, and this is going to be absorbed by the grass and essentially is present in the roots of the plant. Once the grubs hatch later on in the summer and begin to feed, they begin to ingest that active ingredient, and that helps control them. The advantages with this are that you have to be a little bit more environmentally friendly. The imidacloprid is a little safer product than some of the rescue treatments we could do later on in the summer. So typically, like our non-target species that are out and about in the lawns and landscapes are a little bit more protected by going through this method. And usually we're going to get a longer period of control. However, on the flip side, you have to know that grubs are going to be present, and this can be a little bit more of a costly way to go about grub treatment, but still can be a very effective way to control grubs, especially in those areas where we know there's a history of grub issues.
Is this going to be a spot treatment, or is this the entire lawn?
This is typically something that we're going to apply over the entire lawn, allow it to be absorbed by the plant, and that way the plant is protected by the time the grubs are actually out doing their damage, typically more in the late August to September timeframe.
Now, I'm assuming if we do nothing, this is going to continue to spread then.
You know, sometimes doing nothing is an appropriate response when it comes to grub treatment. 1 or 2 grubs here and there really don't mean that there's a huge problem in the landscape. Grubs are naturally occurring in Kansas. It's when we get large numbers of grubs, maybe 6, 10 or more in like a square foot area, that's when we really need to worry about treatment. Otherwise, doing nothing is really going to lead to a lot of damage and potentially loss of some of the areas of our lawn.
So if we miss the treatment window, what should we do?
If we miss our preventative treatment, there's still a way to really effectively control grubs, and that's with what we call a rescue treatment. Rescue treatments are essentially a chemical that's going to contain the active ingredient trichlorophylline, sometimes commonly called Dilox. And this product is going to be really effective in being applied in late July, even the first week of August, to still get control of grubs kind of right when we're first starting to see damage. And that's really going to be an effective way to maybe effectively control our grubs if we miss that preventative window earlier on in the spring and summer.
That's K-State Extension horticulture expert Matt McKernan with information on how to control grubs in home lawns. If you have questions, contact your local K-State Extension office. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.